The scholar and the stranger, the first time Oliver Mercer saw her, was through a veil of dust motes, dancing in the afternoon light that streamed through the tall windows of Blackwell Library. He was buried in research papers, surrounded by stacks of quantum physics journals. When she appeared between the shelves like an apparition, "Schrodinger's equations?" she asked, nodding at his notes. Her voice was soft but confident, with the faintest hint of an accent he couldn't place. Oliver looked up, momentarily stunned. She wore a gray cardigan over a simple black dress, with a blue scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. Dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, framing a face that wasn't classically beautiful but somehow magnetic. "Yes," he managed. "I'm trying to reconcile some inconsistencies in the Copenhagen interpretation." She smiled, setting down her own books. "Mind if I join you?" "I'm Sophia Blackwood." "Oliver Mercer, please." He cleared a space quickly. Gathering scattered papers, that afternoon dissolved into evening as they talked about quantum mechanics, philosophy, and the thin boundaries between science and mysticism. Oliver forgot his caffeine addiction, his looming dissertation deadline, the fact that his bank account held exactly $27 until his next teaching assistant paycheck. He learned she was a visiting scholar, working on something related to theoretical physics and medicine, though she was deliberately vague about specifics. "It's all rather preliminary," she explained, with a slight smile and slightly controversial. In the days that followed, they created their own orbit. Coffee at Brewer's, the cramped cafe where musicians played on Thursday nights. Through the arboretum, where autumn was painting the world in amber and crimson. Late-night conversations at his apartment, a converted attic with slanting cutings and unreliable heating ware. They debated everything from quantum entanglement to poetry. "The universe whispers its secrets in mathematics," she told him one night as they lay on a blanket on his rooftop, watching stars appear, "but it sings them in poetry." There was something elusive about Sophia's subjects she avoided. Phone calls she took in private, and a certain wariness that sometimes shadowed her eyes. When he asked about her family, she simply said, "Complicated," in a tone that discouraged further questions. But these mysteries seemed insignificant against the reality of her. The way she listened with complete attention, how she could quote obscure physicists and Victorian poets with equal ease, the small scar at the corner of her left eyebrow that she touched when deep in thought. For 3 months, Oliver existed in a state of bewildered joy. His dissertation advanced with surprising clarity, inspired by their discussions. He started sleeping regular hours. He even bought a decent coffee maker, splurging on Ethiopian beans that Sophia favored. Then came the morning he awoke to find a message on his phone: "Meet me at the observatory, 8 p.m. Important." The day crawled by. Oliver arrived early, watching the sunset paint the dome of the university observatory in golden light. 8 o'clock came and went. Then 9. At 10, the security guard asked him to leave. 3 days passed. Without word, her phone went straight to voicemail. Her temporary university email returned automated responses. He went to her apartment to find it emptied out. The landlord informing him that Ms. Blackwood had terminated her lease. The only trace she left was a dog-eared copy of A Brief History of Time on his desk, with an inscription on the title page: "Some equations can't be solved, not because they're impossible, but because the variables aren't ready. Forgive me." Empire of Glaston years melted away like morning frost under the relentless sun of Oliver Mercer's ambition. Where once stood a disheveled graduate student surrounded by quantum physics journals and instant noodle cups, now stood the 36-year-old founder and CEO of Quantum Nexus, the company that had transformed theoretical quantum computing into practical reality. The New York Times had called him the architect of the quantum revolution. Forbes featured him on their cover as the reluctant billionaire. His innovation, the stable qubit array that maintained coherence at room temperature, had changed everything from cryptography to medical research. Oliver gazed out from his office on the 42nd floor of the gleaming Nexus Tower in Boston. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the harbor, where boats looked like toys against the vast Atlantic. The office itself was minimalist glass, steel, and light designed to echo the elegant simplicity he sought in his equations. "The Wellington Foundation is confirmed for next Tuesday," said Harriet, his chief of staff, scrolling through her tablet. "And Dr. Townsend from Vienna Children's Research Hospital is particularly interested in discussing applications of your neural mapping technology." Oliver nodded, half listening. The Neural Mapping Project, using quantum sensors to create comprehensive maps of neural pathways, was his most personal endeavor. Not because of its multi-billion-dollar potential, but because it had begun as a thought experiment with Sophia scribbled on the back of a napkin at Brewer's Cafe a lifetime ago. "The board also wants your decision on the Singapore expansion," Harriet continued. "Tell them yes," Oliver said. "But we maintain controlling interest in the research division." After Harriet left, Oliver opened his desk drawer and removed a battered copy of A Brief History of Time. The spine was cracked, the cover faded. He'd read it so many times he could recite entire passages from memory. The inscription inside had become a riddle he couldn't solve. Some equations can't be solved. Not because they're impossible, but because the variables aren't ready. What variables? What was she waiting for? And why leave without explanation? He'd tried to find her, of course. In those first desperate months, he'd hired investigators, searched academic databases, even reached out to physicists at institutions worldwide. Nothing. Sophia Blackwood had vanished as completely as if she'd stepped into one of the theoretical wormholes they'd once discussed. Eventually, Oliver channeled his frustration into work. Quantum theory became his refuge and redemption. When his breakthrough came the stable qubit array that other researchers had deemed impossible, the academic world was stunned. Investment followed. Then patents and quantum nexus. Success brought the expected trappings: the penthouse in Back Bay, the house in the Berkshires, the invitations to elite gatherings. Oliver participated in this life with a detached efficiency, like a man following stage directions in a play. He dated occasionally brilliant, accomplished women who eventually sensed the impenetrable wall around a certain chamber of his heart. "Live like you're waiting for something," his last girlfriend, a neurosurgeon named Josephine, had said when they parted. "It's like you've got one foot in another world." Perhaps she was right, despite therapy, meditation, and the advice of well-meaning friends to move on. Oliver couldn't shake the feeling that his encounter with Sophia hadn't been random, that it was part of some larger pattern he couldn't yet discern. His phone chimed with a calendar. Alert: Vienna Children's Research Hospital tours and funding. Discussion, 10 a.m. tomorrow. Oliver sighed, closing the book and returning it to the drawer. Another hospital, another fundraising opportunity, another chance to see his technology used for genuine good in the world. The Neural Mapping Project had already helped thousands of children with neurological conditions previously considered untreatable. It was important work that mattered. Yet as he packed his briefcase and prepared for the flight to Vienna, a familiar emptiness settled in his chest. For a man who had unraveled some of quantum mechanics' greatest mysteries, he remained haunted by the one puzzle he couldn't solve: the woman who had vanished from his life without explanation, leaving only cryptic words and the ghost of what might have been. Little did he know that in less than 24 hours, in a sunlit corridor, a Vienna Children's Research Hospital, the variables of his unsolved equation were about to align. The encounter of the Vienna Children's Research Hospital gleamed in the April sunshine, its modern glass facade reflecting the historic city surrounding it. Oliver followed Dr. Townsend, the hospital's research director, through corridors where cutting-edge technology coexisted with colorful murals and the occasional therapy dog. "Your neural mapping technology has been revolutionary for our diagnostic work," Dr. Townsend explained, his Austrian accent precise, "particularly with conditions that traditional imaging couldn't detect." Oliver nodded, genuinely pleased. This was the part of his wealth and success that felt real, seeing the practical applications of his theoretical work. "We've integrated it with our treatment of several previously intractable conditions," Dr. Townsend continued. "In fact, our leading researcher on neural pathway regeneration has achieved remarkable results combining your technology with her own innovations. She should be joining us shortly. They entered a bright conference room where hospital staff and board members waited. Oliver was midway through his presentation on the next generation of neural mapping technology when the door opened. "Ah, perfect timing," Dr. Townsend said. "Mr. Mercer, may I introduce our Director of Pediatric Neuroscience, Dr. Sophia Blackwood." The world tilted on its axis. She stood in the doorway, a decade older, but unmistakable. The same dark waves of hair, now cut to shoulder length, the same intelligent eyes, the same small scar at the corner of her left eyebrow. She wore a white lab coat over a blue dress, a stethoscope around her neck, and an expression of absolute shock that must have mirrored his own. For one suspended moment, they stared at each other across the room, across the years. Oliver forgot his presentation, forgot the hospital executives watching curiously, forgot how to breathe. Sophia recovered first. "Forgive my tardiness," she said smoothly, though her voice held the faintest tremor. "A patient required my attention." She took a seat at the far end of the table, her eyes never leaving his face. Somehow, Oliver completed his presentation, answering questions on autopilot, while his mind raced. Sophia here, a doctor, director of neuroscience, the woman he'd searched for, the ghost who had haunted him for a decade. As the meeting ended, she slipped out quickly. Oliver made his excuses and followed, catching her in a quiet corridor. "Sophia," he said, the name, both familiar and strange, on his tongue after so long. She turned, her composure cracking slightly. "Oliver, I never expected. You're the last person I thought I'd see here. 10 years, he said, surprised by the calmness in his voice despite the earthquake inside him. "You disappeared without explanation." She glanced down the hallway. "Isn't the place I finish my rounds at 6? There's a cafe in the Stat Park, Mireille. I'll meet you there at 7. Before he could respond, a door opened further down the corridor, and a young girl bounded out. "Mom, Dr. Friedrich says I can go home tomorrow if the final tests look good." The girl was perhaps 9 years old, with unruly dark curls and a constellation of freckles across her nose. She wore hospital pajamas decorated with stars and planets, and her left arm was in a complex brace. Sophia's face softened. "That's wonderful, Eleonora." She turned to Oliver, hesitation visible in her eyes. "This is my daughter, Ellie. Ellie. This is Mr. Mercer. He invented the special machine that's been helping with your treatments." The girl looked up at Oliver with curious eyes, intelligent, assessing eyes the exact shade of blue-green as his. Own the exact shape. A mirror image of the eyes he saw in his reflection every morning. "Cool," she said. "Mom says your quantum thingy can see brain signals that regular machines can't." "Is that true?" Oliver couldn't speak, couldn't move. Time seemed to freeze as he looked from the girl to Sophia, whose face had gone pale. "Ellie," Sophia said quickly, "why don't you go back to your room? I need to discuss something with Mr. Mercer, and then I'll come read with you before your physical therapy." When the girl disappeared through the door, Sophia met Oliver's stunned gaze. 7 o'clock, she said quietly. "I'll explain everything." Buried Truths, the Mireille Cafe nestled at the edge of Stat Park, its terrace overlooking the duck pond, where the last light of day rippled across the water. Oliver arrived early, claiming a secluded table far from other patrons. His mind had been in chaos since the hospital, thoughts spiraling around one impossible conclusion. Sophia arrived exactly at 7. Her lab coat exchanged for a simple blue dress and cardigan. She looked both familiar and strange, the girl from his memories, now a woman with lines of experience at the corners of her eyes. "You have a daughter?" Oliver said, without preamble as she sat down. "Yes." She met his gaze steadily. "She's 9. Right, 9. And a half," Sophia corrected softly. "And she's mine." Not a question. Sophia nodded, her hands clasped tightly on the table. Yes, the confirmation hit him like a physical blow. "Why?" he managed. "Why disappear? Why keep her from me?" The waiter approached, but Sophia waved him away with a polite smile. When they were alone again, she took a deep breath. "My name isn't really Blackwood," she began. "It's Novak, Sophia Novak. I was born in Croatia, but my family moved to the United States when I was 12. She paused, gathering herself. My father, Stefan Novak, was a physicist specializing in quantum applications for defense systems. He worked for the government, then for private contractors. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that he was selling classified research to several foreign entities. Oliver listened, his shock giving way to a focused intensity as Sophia's story unfolded. When I was completing my doctorate, the FBI approached me. They'd been building a case against my father for years. They wanted me to help gather evidence. She looked down at her hands. I refused at first, but then they showed me what he was involved in, weapon systems that could kill thousands. Agreed to help. That's why you were at my university, Oliver said, realization dawning. Your father's contacts were there, she nodded. Professor Hammond was unwittingly providing research that my father was weaponizing. I was supposed to document their communications, nothing more. Her voice softened. I never expected you. I never expected to fall in love. The word hung between them, a fragile bridge across the chasm of years. When I discovered I was pregnant, everything changed. The FBI was closing in on my father, and he'd become suspicious. He had dangerous associates. When he discovered I was working with federal agents, he threatened me. She took a shaky breath. Ah! And when one of his contacts saw us together and reported back, he threatened you too. So you ran, Oliver said. The FBI offered me witness protection. New identity, new location. They moved me to Europe, helped me finish my medical studies under my new name. She looked at him directly. I wanted to tell you about the baby, but it would have put both of you in danger. My father had resources, connections. If he'd known about his grandchild, ... What happened to him? Oliver asked. Federal prison initially. He died 3 years ago. She hesitated. That's when I started working on having my identity restrictions lifted. It's a long process. I was planning to find you once it was completely safe, once I had full legal permission. I never imagined you'd walk into my hospital, Oliver's mind raced, absorbing this new reality. Eleonora, he said, testing his daughter's name. What happened to her arm? Osteosarcoma, bone cancer, diagnosed when she was 7. Ow. That's actually what led me to your technology. It allowed us to map the neural pathways affected by tumor pressure with unprecedented precision. A smile flickered across her face. She's in remission now. The brace is from a recent surgery to repair damage from earlier treatments. She has my eyes, Oliver said quietly, and your mind, your curiosity, your stubbornness. Sophia's expression softened. She knows about you, or a version of you? I told her that her father was a brilliant physicist who couldn't be part of our lives because of complicated circumstances. I never lied about how I felt about you. Oliver struggled to process everything: the revelation of his daughter, the explanation for Sophia's disappearance, the lost decade they could never recover. I want to know her, he said finally. If she wants to know me. She does, Sophia replied. She's been asking more questions as she's gotten older. She hesitated. But Oliver, I need you to understand she's been through so much with her illness. Her life is here in Vienna, her doctors, her support system. I'm not trying to disrupt her life, Oliver said. I just want to be part of it, whatever that looks like. As night settled over Vienna, they talked of practical matters: how to introduce him to Eleonora, legal considerations, the life they might build around their daughter. The anger and hurt Oliver had carried for a decade began to transform into something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. When they finally left the cafe, the stars were bright overhead. The variables weren't ready, Oliver said quietly, remembering her note. That's what you meant. Sophia nodded. Now, Oliver said. We create a new equation. Full circle autumn painted Vienna's parks in gold and russet as Oliver stepped off the private jet at Schwechat Airport. 3 months had passed since the day he'd walked into that hospital conference room and found his past and future colliding. His driver navigated through the historic city toward the apartment he'd purchased in the 19th district, to spacious penthouse with views of the Vienna woods. Just 15 minutes from both Sophia's home and the hospital. The renovation had been completed last week, including the most important room. Eleonora's Oliver checked his watch. 2 hours until he was expected at Sophia's for dinner, a weekly tradition they'd established. Ellie, as she preferred to be called, would be finishing her piano lesson now. He smiled, remembering how she'd informed him during their second meeting that she found music mathematically satisfying. His phone chimed with a text from Sophia. Ellie wants to know if you're bringing the telescope tonight. Clear skies predicted. He replied affirmatively. The portable observatory-grade telescope had been his gift, after Ellie expressed interest in astronomy. Their first real connection had been stargazing from the hospital roof during her final week of treatment, where he'd explained quantum physics while she peppered him with questions that showed a mind as sharp and curious as his own. The past 3 months had been a careful dance of building relationships while respecting boundaries. Oliver had restructured his life, appointing Harriet as coup of quantum nexus and establishing a remote work arrangement that allowed him to split his time between Boston and Vienna. He'd also created a research division at the Vienna hospital, ensuring the neural mapping technology that had helped his daughter would continue advancing. With Sophia, things were more complex. The love that had burned so brightly a decade ago hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed. Shadowed by years of separation and the weight of unilateral decisions that had forever altered both their lives. They were co-parents now, navigating a relationship neither had imagined possible. At Sophia's apartment that evening, Oliver found Ellie waiting impatiently. Her dark curls pulled back in a messy ponytail. A star chart spread across the dining table. "Dad!" she called, the words still new enough to send a jolt through him. "I calculated where we should be able to see Neptune tonight. Did you bring the telescope? Mom made your favorite pasta because she says you work too hard and forget to eat properly." Oliver caught Sophia's eye over their daughter's head, sharing a moment of quiet amusement. Ellie had quickly adapted to having him in her life, approaching their relationship with the same methodical curiosity she applied to everything, from piano concertos to physics problems. After dinner, they set up the telescope on the building's rooftop garden. As Ellie focused intently on adjusting the settings, Sophia stood beside Oliver at the railing, looking out over the city lights. "The hospital board approved your research proposal," she said. "The quantum neural regeneration project can begin next month." "Good," Oliver replied. "I've been reviewing your work on myelin pathway restoration. It's brilliant, Sophia. Combined with the new mapping technology, we could revolutionize treatment for dozens of neurological conditions." She smiled, the wind catching her hair. "Full circle, isn't it? It's those theoretical discussions in your apartment, and now we're making them real," he finished. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with the weight of everything they'd lost and everything they'd unexpectedly found. "Mom, Dad, I found it," Ellie called excitedly. "Come look at Neptune." They joined their daughter at the telescope, taking turns peering at the distant blue planet. Oliver watched as Sophia explained something about orbital patterns to Ellie, their heads bent together, profiles so similar yet distinct. The fragmented pieces of his life were realigning into something new, not the life he'd imagined at 26, nor the isolated success he'd built at 36, but something richer and more complex. Later, as they walked Ellie back to her room, she asked sleepily, "Can we go to the observatory in Boston when I visit at Christmas?" "You promised to show me the quantum computers, too." "Absolutely," Oliver assured her. "The whole lab is excited to meet you." After Ellie fell asleep, Sophia walked Oliver to the door. "She's thriving with you in her life," she said quietly. "I should have found a way to tell you sooner." "We can't change the past," Oliver replied, "but the future." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a battered copy of A Brief History of Time. Opening it to the inscription she'd written a decade ago, he showed her what he'd added beneath her words. "Some equations take time to solve, not because they're impossible, but because the universe needs to align them perfectly. Ready now?" Oh, Sophia's eyes met his, a complicated mix of emotions crossing her face. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "Just letting you know that door isn't closed." "Not for me." She took the book, her fingers brushing his. "The universe does seem to have its own timeline," she said softly. As Oliver stepped into the autumn night, he felt lighter than he had in years. The equation of his life had been fundamentally altered, complicated by new variables, expanded by possibilities he'd never imagined. And for the first time in a decade, the future wasn't a solitary path stretching before him, but a constellation of connections, with his daughter at its center and Sophia orbiting nearby close enough that gravity might eventually draw them together again. The equation wasn't solved yet, but at last all the variables were present, waiting for time to work its patient mathematics.